This video is now in session, and in the wake of the 2020 Democratic Party's primary in Iowa, there have been questions as to where the primary should be held in 2024, whether they should be continued to be held in Iowa and New Hampshire, or if they should be moved over to more to states that represent the Democratic Party more accurately, like Illinois and New Jersey. So those questions have sparked a debate on the future of the Democratic primaries and about where we should put them, but this video is actually something entirely different. Do we need these kinds of primaries at all? So these kinds of primaries work in a system that is like a party primary, where if you're registered with a party, you get to vote in the party's primary in their bid to choose a nominee. So for the presidential primary in 2020, if you were part of the Democratic Party, you could vote for one of these candidates who you think should represent the Democrats in the presidential race. And then the top candidate from the Democratic Party and the top candidate from the Republican Party, as well as other third parties, go against each other in the presidential election. And that's how historically this kind of system has been worked. In almost every single state, this is how primaries are run, with the exception of California and Washington and a few other states. But for the most part, this is the system. Except this system has shown its flaws in recent years, because the system incentivizes a polarization and partisanship. How party primaries work is that the electorate between a Democratic Party primary and the electorate of America as a whole, or a state as a whole, can be vastly different. We saw with Donald Trump, with the Republican primary, where that electorate was had very much been doubtful of Obama's presidency, and as well as former Republican nominees like Mitt Romney and as well as John McCain. So those kinds of voters wanted Donald Trump, but the voters of America did not want most voters in America did not want Donald Trump. He lost in the popular vote against Hillary Clinton. And the same can be applied for Hillary Clinton, where even though the Democratic Party wanted Hillary Clinton, the American electorate, for almost the most part, did not want Hillary Clinton in the 2016 presidential election. And what this system does is it incentivizes candidates to go as far to the extreme as possible. It incentivizes Republican candidates to go as far right as possible, and for the Democratic Party's candidates to go far left as possible. And this has been shown in multiple instances. Where we've seen in recent years the rise of Tea Party Republicans, those who participate in the House Freedom Caucus, and that's promulgated by the system of presidential primaries, and that will continue to come as long as we see these party primaries. So a system that could be replaced by this instead is a nonpartisan blanket primary. And what that basically is that Democrats, Republicans, and every single other candidate are matched together in one primary. So this is just one example in California. So all of the candidates for the 2018 Senate race in California would be up in the nonpartisan primary, and everyone, not just Democrats or Republicans, can vote for this primary. And you can see right here that Kamala Harris and Loretta Sanchez were the top two candidates. So the top two candidates from there go off to the general election. So Kamala Harris and Loretta Sanchez, because both of them got the top two spots, they went to the general election, and as a result, Kamala Harris won with 61.6% of the vote. So what this does is it kind of de-incentivizes that kind of polarization to occur with this kind of election, where Kamala Harris is more of the establishment Democrat, while Loretta Sanchez is more of the conservative Democrat. Both are not progressive, and both of them are certainly not far right, and that is what a nonpartisan blanket primary does. But some people object to this, especially progressives and conservatives, nationalists, object to this kind of system because it de-incentivizes their thoughts. In this kind of race, you can see that the progressives didn't get a spot at the general election, and there are also evidences to show that this system might not even work for its goal, which is to incentivize moderation, because in the 2020 election in Georgia, the 2020 Senate special election, we had Kelly Loeffler go against Doug Collins and as well as Raphael Warnock, and that was mainly the primary. So what Kelly Loeffler did in a bid to get Republican votes in that nonpartisan blanket primary was go as far to the right as possible, calling herself more conservative than Attila the Hun. So she won a spot at the runoff because she got the Republican vote in Georgia. But that states more of to rebut that states more of the electorate in Georgia rather than the system failing to do its goal, because ultimately it's trying to get every single voter involved to vote for who they think should represent the future of their state and who should represent themselves. And that is what, again, a nonpartisan blanket primary does. And in some ways, it actually could be best summed up with like a hypothetical of the New York City mayoral election. So in the New York City mayoral election, there are a total of 2 Republicans and a lot of Democrats, including Andrew Yang, Eric Adams, Catherine Garcia, Maya Wiley, Sean Donovan, as well as Scott Stringer, and a whole host of other candidates. So with a regular party primary, we could see a situation where Catherine Garcia or Maya Wiley wins out the Democratic primary, and both of them are more liberal than Andrew Yang and Eric Adams. So they go off to the general election. But they are progressive, and even though New York City is completely Democratic, it has voted for a Republican before. And as a result, there are some voters who might not think that Maya Wiley is the best path for New York. So if all the Republicans and all the Democratic voters, as well as all independent voters, were all together in one election, then they might prefer the more people might prefer Andrew Yang and Eric Adams than Maya Wiley and Catherine Garcia. But because the Democratic Party, which is more to the left than the Republican constituents, voted for Maya Wiley and Catherine Garcia in the Democratic primary, then as a result, the Andrew Yang and Eric Adams don't end out on top. So that is the difference, the main difference between a regular party primary and a nonpartisan blanket primary. So this is just an idea, because currently speaking, this is only implemented in a few states like California. California, ironically, this kind of thing was endorsed by Republicans. Republicans wanted a nonpartisan blanket primary system for moderation purposes, so that California does not elect progressive senators. But as you can see, it kind of backfired on them, and it opens up another potential problem where you can have 2 candidates that end out who are on the same party, and this has happened multiple times. This has happened with California with the 2016 election. This has happened with Texas with the 6th congressional district special election, where Jake Elzy and Susan Wright, both of them are Republicans, were the top 2 of this kind of primary system, and they advanced with no Democratic candidate. The same thing happened. The same thing happened in the 2018 Senate election in California. But again, that's ultimately the voices of the constituents rather than the problems of the system. if there are so many constituents who belong to the Democratic Party, then obviously Democrats are going to win out both of those top two positions. If there are so many Republicans in Texas's 6th congressional district, then ultimately there will be 2 Republicans in the runoff in the general election, and that's ultimately how it's supposed to work, which is that that voters choose who they think would best represent them, either if they're a Democrat, a Republican, or an independent. So, what are the chances of this system actually working out, though? This kind of system could work out in presidential elections, in senatorial elections, in House elections, in every single election, and it has been implemented by a couple of states like California, Alaska, Washington, and more. But it's a system that would most likely not happen in speaking nationally, because even though the establishment would like this kind of system, it also is very tough to change how an election works. And if there's anything in an election that fundamentally changes, then there is going to be opposition from one side, and it will ultimately end up in a stalemate. Just like how the voting laws enacted by Republicans in Republican states have been decried by corporations and as well as Democrats. So if we have a system that goes to a nonpartisan blanket primary, we could expect the same thing with either party going against this system, especially progressives and as well as far-right candidates who will definitely go against this system, and that would not mean that this system would be likely to be implemented. So again, like most other solutions, while it might be nice and while it might solve a lot of problems, ultimately it's not going to happen, because there are always going to be people who will object to these kinds of decisions. That said, you can make it possible if you believe in this kind of idea by telling your state representatives, because this is mainly managed by the state legislature. So if you tell them, maybe they might enact this kind of plan in their own state. But it's ultimately up to your judgment. This is just our view and as well as the opposing view of this issue, and it's up to your judgment, and you should be the one to make the judgment, to make up your mind, since ultimately we're not trying to force you to make a conclusion in your head. So that's the end of this video. I hope you enjoyed it. This video is now adjourned, and I'll see you in the next one.